even through fire. Chapter 1. What August Does to a Valley. The boy's name had been Caleb. Elena knew better than to learn their names before she had to. 8 years of hospital chaplaincy had taught her grief's own calculus, that names were weight, and she was already carrying a great deal, but she had learned Caleb Norris's name at 7:42 that evening when his mother pressed Elena's hands between both of hers and said it like a question, like maybe the name itself was something to hold on to. Caleb. He's 26. His name is Caleb. And Elena had said it back because that was one of the things you learned to do, and she had meant it because that was the only way she knew how to do this work. He had died at 9:14. Now it was nearly midnight, and Elena stood with her back against the hallway wall of the 6th floor, eyes closed, the fluorescent hum of the corridor pressing against her like a third presence. She was not praying. She was not resting. She was doing something that had no clean name, trying to locate the woman she'd been before she walked into that room 4 hours ago, like finding her footing in a current. Every few minutes, a nurse passed, and she straightened slightly, reflexively, and then let her shoulders drop again when the footsteps faded. Through the window at the end of the hall, Missoula was barely there. 6 weeks into the worst fire season the Lolo National Forest had seen in a decade, the valley had stopped looking like itself. The mountains that define this city, Mount Sentinel to the east with its white letter cut into the hillside, Mount Jumbo across the river, the long green ridgeline of the Rattlesnake Wilderness to the north, had gone the color of old photographs, soft-edged and uncertain in the smoke. The Clark Fork River was down there somewhere beneath the haze, running low and warm through the city's heart, but from the 6th floor tonight, it was invisible. What remained of the sky was the color of a bruise, lit from beneath by the orange glow on the southern horizon where the Lolo complex was still burning, had been burning for 31 days, and showed no interest in stopping. Elena had grown up in Ohio. She had come to Missoula for graduate school at the University of Montana and never left, which was how it usually went with people and this city. Something about how the mountains enclosed it, how the Clark Fork ran through downtown like the city had been built to keep the river company, rather than the other way around. She loved it in a way that had nothing to do with nostalgia and everything to do with how it fit her, like a pair of boots after enough years. But August in a fire year was something Missoula required you to survive. The smoke settled into the valley and stayed, held in by the mountains that made the place beautiful, and the whole city breathed it and drove through it and went about its life in that strange amber light that made everything look sacred and a little threatening at once. The Missoula Smoke Jumper Base sat less than 3 miles from the hospital, the oldest active smoke jumper base in the country, and Elena had made her peace with what that proximity meant during fire season. The helicopters, the convoys, the constant arrival of people who had been somewhere the fire was. She pushed off the wall and walked to the family waiting room at the end of the hall. Sandra Norris was still there. Elena had suspected she would be. The woman was 61 years old and had driven 9 hours from Billings when the call came, and she was sitting now in the chair nearest the window with a paper cup of cold coffee and both hands folded in her lap, looking at nothing. The room smelled like the vending machine down the hall and old carpet and grief, which was its own distinct and recognizable smell, and Elena had long since stopped noticing it. She crossed to the chair beside Sandra and sat down without asking if it was all right. For a while, neither of them spoke. "He loved this," Sandra said eventually. She was looking out at the orange horizon. "The firework. I want you to know that. I used to worry every summer, and he'd say, 'Mom, this is it for me. This is the thing.'" She paused. "I don't know if that makes it better or worse." "Both," Elena said. "I think it's allowed to be both." Sandra looked at her then. Her eyes were dry. She had used up everything earlier, Elena knew, in the room at the end of the hall. And there was something in them now that was past crying and moving toward something quieter, something that might become, eventually, the first cellular structure of peace. "You stayed," Sandra said. "You didn't have to stay this long." "There's nowhere I need to be." It was true, and it wasn't. Elena had been on shift since 7 that morning. Her feet ached in a way that had gone past complaining and settled into a low, constant frequency she could ignore if she concentrated. But the woman in front of her had just lost her youngest son, and the mathematics of that dwarfed everything else. And so Elena sat, and she listened. And when Sandra talked about Caleb, his laugh, how he always drove too fast on country roads, the fact that he'd called her every Sunday without fail since he was 19. Elena received every word like it mattered because it did. She stayed another 40 minutes. She was crossing the third-floor bridge toward the East Wing elevators when she nearly walked into Simone Hartley. Simone caught her by both arms, and they stood there for a moment, holding each other upright, both of them blinking with the slightly unfocused quality that came after too many hours and too much of being human in an inhuman amount. Simone was still in scrubs, her hair pulled back in an arrangement that had started the morning as something intentional and had long since become purely functional. She was one of the best emergency physicians Elena had ever watched work, and she was also Elena's closest friend in the building, possibly her closest friend anywhere, and she had a look for Elena that bypassed the chaplain and went straight for the person underneath. She was doing it now. "You look terrible," Simone said. "You're a doctor," Elena said. "You could phrase that more clinically." "I could. You still look terrible." Simone released her arms but didn't move. "6th floor?" "Yes." "The Norris family." Elena nodded. Simone's expression shifted to something gentler. She had her own version of this, a way of being present without making it a performance. And Elena respected it deeply, as she respected anyone who did hard things without using them as evidence of their own virtue. They had an unspoken contract, the two of them, built over years of hallway conversations and cafeteria lunches, and the occasional evening on Simone's back porch overlooking the Rattlesnake Creek drainage. The terms of the contract were not formally stated, but clearly understood. "I will see you. I will not force what you are not ready to give." "Coffee tomorrow," Simone said. "Real coffee, not the stuff from the third-floor machine. I mean it. I know you mean it." 7:30, before your first rounds. "I'll be there." Simone studied her face one more moment, and whatever she found there seemed to satisfy enough. She squeezed Elena's arm once and turned down the corridor, and Elena watched her go and thought, not for the first time, that she was grateful for people who knew how to love without requiring you to perform the receiving of it. The drive home took 11 minutes on a night with no traffic, and Elena drove them with the windows down, despite the smoke, which she knew was not advisable, and which she did anyway, because she needed the air moving against her face, and because there was something almost penitential about it, breathing the same thing the valley was breathing, not standing apart from it. She took the route along the river. It was out of her way by only a few blocks, and she took it most nights without thinking about it, like returning to something that didn't ask anything of you. The Clark Fork moved alongside her in the dark, low and slow in the August drought, the cottonwoods on its bank gone still in the no wind. She passed Caras Park, empty at this hour, the outdoor stage dark, the pavilion closed up. In 2 weeks, the smoke would thin, and the park would return to itself. Families and dogs and people eating lunch in the riverside grass. But tonight, it had the desolation of a place designed for people, when all its people had gone home. The mountains were invisible in all directions. That was the thing about fire season in this valley. Not the heat, Not the air quality warnings, not even the orange sky, but the loss of the mountains. They were always there in the peripheral vision, shaping the light, shaping the feel of the city. And when they were gone behind the smoke, the whole place felt unmoored, like a sentence missing its most important word. Elena drove past the university and turned south, climbing the residential road that led to her house. A small craftsman with a front porch that looked toward Mount Sentinel on clear days and looked toward a wall of gray on days like this one. She parked. She sat in the car for a moment with the engine off. She should pray. She knew she should pray. It was not an unfamiliar sensation, this knowledge paired with the absence of words. She was a chaplain. She was a woman of faith. She had prayed with more people through more harrowing things than most, and she meant every word she spoke in those moments, and the faith beneath them was real. She was certain of that, as she was certain of the mountains, even when she couldn't see them. But tonight, the words had been used up. All of them, or nearly all, poured out across the day and the evening into rooms full of people who needed them, and what was left in her own chest was something she didn't know how to name. Not doubt, not despair, something quieter than both. Something that felt like standing in a burned-over meadow after the fire has moved on. The ground still warm underfoot, the air still carrying what it carried, nothing yet knowing whether it was devastation or the necessary first condition of new growth. She went inside. She drank a glass of water at the kitchen sink. She looked at the cat, a large orange tabby named Calvin, who looked back at her with the complete and serene indifference that she had come to find truly comforting. "I know," she told him. He blinked. She was asleep by 12:30. The call came at 10 the next morning, between her second and third rounds, when she was standing at the nursing station on the 4th floor, filling out visitation notes. "Ms. Marsh?" The unit clerk on the 6th floor had a voice like she was perpetually breaking news carefully. "We have a patient requesting the chaplain, room 612. He was admitted last night. Hotshot crew from the Bitterroot district. Smoke inhalation, some minor burns. He's been asking since about 8 o'clock. A small pause. He's been pretty patient about it. Just keeps asking. Elena capped her pen. "I'll be right up." "His name is Falconer, Wade Falconer." She gathered herself as she always did, before entering a room. Not performance, but intention. A brief internal accounting. What do I have to offer? What does this person need? She took the elevator to the 6, straightened her badge, and walked the corridor toward room 612. At the door, she paused, her hand resting on the frame, her breathing even. Outside the hallway window, in the amber August morning, the mountains were still gone. The sky was the color of old brass. The valley held its smoke, like a secret. She knocked twice and pushed open the door. Chapter 2. Who takes care of the chaplain? The man in room 612 was sitting up. That was the first thing Elena noticed. Not the bandaging on his forearms, not the oxygen cannula he was wearing with the obvious intention of removing it, but the fact that he was upright in a hospital bed at a 45-degree angle, both feet flat on the mattress, reading something on his phone with the attentive posture of a man in a meeting, rather than a man recovering from smoke inhalation. He looked up when she pushed the door open, and his eyes were clear and direct, in a way that calibrated her expectations immediately. This was not a man in crisis. He had asked for the chaplain for a specific reason, and he was ready to have that conversation. "Mr. Falconer?" she said. "I'm Elena Marsh, the hospital chaplain." "Wade," he said. He set the phone face down on the blanket. "Thank you for coming." She pulled the chair from beside the window closer to the bed. She always did this, the small reduction of distance, and settled into it. He watched her do it with the same direct attention. He was somewhere in his early 40s, she guessed, with a face shaped by years of squinting into wind and smoke, not weathered in the worn-out sense, but in a way that mountain terrain was weathered, something essential brought to the surface. His hair was dark with gray at the temples. He was still trying to pull the oxygen cannula away from his nose with 2 fingers, absently, like worrying at a loose thread. "The nurses will take that personally," Elena said. He looked down at his hand as if noticing it for the first time. "My oxygen is at 97. "I believe you. Tell that to the nurses." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the architectural suggestion of one. He left the cannula alone. She moved through the opening she always moved through. Warm, practiced, and true to herself. Because practice and authenticity were not in conflict and never had been. She asked how he was feeling, whether the pain was managed, whether there was family she could help contact, or who might need support. He answered each question briefly and directly, the way someone answered questions they'd already thought through. His crew had been cleared, a sentence he said, with an exhale that told her he'd been holding that breath since Tuesday. Some burns, some smoke inhalation, nothing that wouldn't heal. His second-in-command, a woman named Rosa, was coordinating with the district. Everything was handled. "Is there something specific that brought you to the chaplain?" Elena asked. "Or did you just want someone to talk to? Both are completely valid." Wade looked at her for a moment. Not an uncomfortable silence. He seemed at ease in silence, which was not something you could say of most people in hospital beds. Then he said, "Can I ask you something first?" "Of course." "How long have you been doing this?" She had been asked this before. 8 years at St. Patrick's, about 10 total, counting my residency. "What drew you to it?" She gave the answer she always gave, the true one. Someone had done it for her. Once, at a time when she'd needed it, and she had decided that was what she wanted her life to be. The short version, she kept it short by habit, by the well-worn reflex of returning the conversation to the person in the room who needed it, which was never her. Wade listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You glossed over the middle part." Elena paused. "I'm sorry?" "The part where someone did it for you. You moved past it quickly." He said it without challenge, just the same observational tone as telling someone they'd missed their turn. "The important part is the work," Elena said, "not the backstory." He tilted his head slightly. Said nothing. She regrouped with the smoothness of 8 years of practice. "What was it you wanted to talk through, Wade?" "I wanted to talk about my crew," he said. "Not the medical situation." That's getting handled." "I wanted to talk about the fact that I led 8 people into a fire on Tuesday, and some of them didn't come out unmarked, and what you do with that when you're the one who made the call." He paused. "I know what I believe. I know where I stand. I just wanted to say it out loud to someone who'd understand the weight of it." There it was. The clear, honest reason, the request she could meet. She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about them, your crew." He talked about them with the care of someone who felt the weight of belonging, not possessively, but with attention. He named them. He said what each one was good at, what they brought that no one else on the crew brought. Danny Bryce, 28, who talked too much and could read a fire's direction from a hillside half a mile away with an accuracy that still startled Wade after 3 seasons. Rosa Delgado, who had been passed over twice for crew leader at other stations and had come to Wade's team and become the best second he'd ever worked with. He talked about the responsibility of it, not as a burden, more as a fact, as gravity was a fact. The knowledge that when he made a call, 8 people moved. The Bible says the one who oversees others will be held to a higher account, he said. That's not meant to make you afraid. It's meant to make you careful. He said it naturally, the verse woven into the sentence rather than presented like a lesson, and Elena noted it without comment. I've been careful for 16 years. Tuesday I was careful, and it still cost people. He looked at the window. I don't need you to tell me that's not my fault. I know it's not. I need to say out loud that it costs something anyway, that knowing it's not your fault doesn't make the weight less. No, Elena said, it doesn't. But you carry it forward. You carry it forward. He looked at her then, and she had the sensation she occasionally had with people. Not often, but occasionally, that she was being seen rather than processed, that the attention being paid to her was specific rather than general. It was a brief sensation. She had learned not to examine it. From the other side of the wall to the left, a voice carried through with the ease of someone who had concluded that walls were a social convention rather than a structural reality. Hey, boss, did the chaplain bring snacks? Wade closed his eyes briefly. Elena glanced at the wall, then back at him. That would be Danny, he confirmed. Room 614. They tried to put us on different floors. And? He asked to be moved. She pressed her lips together to keep from smiling and did not quite succeed. She raised her voice just enough. No snacks today, Danny. I'll see what I can do. A pause, then, I'd accept a prayer in lieu of snacks. I can arrange that. I'm not going anywhere. She turned back to Wade, who was looking at the wall with the expression of a man who had long since made his peace with something he could not change. There was warmth in it, she noticed. Open, unguarded warmth. He cared about that young man in the next room in a way he didn't seem to think needed concealing. They talked for another 30 minutes. He asked about her work, not with the performative interest of someone filling conversation, but with the focused attention of someone who wanted to understand the actual thing, how the days worked, what it cost, what it gave back. She answered his questions with care, giving enough to be honest and redirecting when the questions pointed somewhere she didn't want to go. She was, as she always was, impeccably skilled at this, keeping herself adjacent to the conversation rather than inside it. At one point, she gave an answer she had given many times, something about the sustaining nature of the work, how much she received from the patients and families she served, how the giving was also a form of receiving, and she watched Wade let a beat of silence sit after she finished. 2 seconds. 3. You're very good at that, he said. At what? Turning the question back around. I ask about you, and you give me something that sounds like an answer, but is mostly about them. He said it without criticism, just the same observational tone as before. It's a skill. I'm just noticing it. Elena didn't respond immediately. She felt a small, specific pressure, as though a finger had found a spot that was sore and pressed it gently, not to hurt, just to locate it. She managed a measured smile. Chaplains are trained to keep the focus on the person they're serving. I know, he said. I'm just wondering whether it ever goes off shift. He tilted his head toward the window, where the amber August light was pressing through the smoke. You walked through that door this morning looking more worn out than I do. I'm on day 3 of oxygen. You look like you've been carrying something longer than 3 days. He paused. Who takes care of the chaplain, Elena? It was the first time he had used her name. She held the question at the same careful distance she held most things directed at her. She could feel it, though, its weight pressing through her usual deflections and past them, finding the low places in ground that only looked solid. She thought of Caleb Norris's mother pressing her hands between both of hers. She thought of the stairwell wall she had stood against at midnight. "I have a very good support system," she said. Her voice was warm, her smile real, her posture completely composed. She believed the words about 40%. Wade looked at her for a moment, then he nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something he'd already expected, and she had the uncomfortable impression he knew exactly how much of her answer was real. But he didn't push. He let the question settle where she would have to find it later, and moved on. She came back that evening. She told herself it was for Danny, which was true. He had requested a brief prayer in the afternoon, and she had been pulled away twice before she could make it back, and she owed him the follow-through. She sat with Danny Bryce for 20 minutes, and he was exactly what she had expected from the voice through the wall. Quick and self-deprecating, with the raw edges that young men wore when they were frightened and didn't want anyone to know it. She prayed with him, and the prayer was real, and he said afterward, his eyes on the ceiling, that he'd never been scared on a fire before Tuesday. She told him fear was information, not weakness. He seemed to need that more than anything else she could have offered. On her way out, she stopped in Wade's doorway. She could have kept walking. She considered it for half a second, and then she stopped. Because the honest reason she had come back to this floor was not only Danny, and she was not, she liked to think, a person who lied to herself. "I didn't mean to leave it like that this morning," she said. He looked up from the book that had replaced the phone. "You didn't leave it badly." "The question you asked, I gave you a non-answer." "I know." She stood in the doorway rather than entering the room. "I'm working on it," she said, which was not something she had planned to say, and which was more honest than almost anything she'd said to another person this week. "I think I'm better at this work than I am at receiving it. I know that's what I'm supposed to be working on." He didn't tell her what a good insight that was. He didn't affirm her growth or offer a Bible verse. He just said, "That makes sense," in the tone of someone who found her completely believable. They talked for another 20 minutes, standing and leaning in the doorway, the conversation moving through his 16 years in Missoula. The mountains he knew well enough to read like handwriting, how he'd come to the city as a 25-year-old with a seasonal contract and never quite been able to make himself leave. She mentioned attending Riverside Community Church, more or less offhandedly, and he went still for a second. "Riverside," he said. "For about 4 years now. I lead a men's small group at Riverside." He said it slowly, as though he were doing arithmetic and wanted to get it right. "Pastor Carl's church." "Pastor Carl's church," she confirmed. They looked at each other across the doorframe with the mutual recognition of people who had been in the same building for 4 years and apparently occupied completely different portions of it. Elena thought of the Sunday mornings she had filed in and out of the sanctuary, the coffee hour in the fellowship hall, the faces she knew by sight but not by name because she had been attending Riverside, as she attended most things, present, giving, moving through, never quite settling. Wade, she gathered, was the opposite. His small group meant people knew his name, his history, his crew. He was rooted there in a way she had not allowed herself to be. "I think I've seen you," he said. "On the right side of the sanctuary." "Third row from the back. I'm on the left, about the middle." "We've been attending the same church for 4 years, Elena said, and never spoken. And never spoken." He considered this with the same deliberate attention he brought to everything and said, "Well, we've fixed that now, I suppose." She said goodnight and walked down the corridor to the elevator and pressed the button for the parking garage and stood in the descending car with her hands folded and the question moving through her in slow, persistent circles. She turned it over as you would a sentence that had caught something true. Testing it, feeling for its edges. Who takes care of the chaplain? The elevator opened on the parking level, and she walked through the concrete quiet to her car and got in and drove home along the river. And the mountains were still gone, and the smoke still pressed against the valley from every direction, and she thought about it the whole way home. She had no answer. But she was, for the first time in longer than she could place, truly asking the question. Chapter 3. The Letter from Denver. 3 days passed as hospital days passed during fire season, in layers, one crisis beneath the next, the hours measured not by the clock but by rooms entered and exited, by hands held and prayers offered, and the specific silence that came after. Elena moved through them as she had moved through hundreds like them, deliberately, carefully. At the end of each shift, she drove home along the Clark Fork and sat on the porch with Calvin in her lap, and the smoke filtered dark around her, and she told herself she was resting. On the second day, she stopped by room 612 before her afternoon rounds and found Wade sitting on the edge of his bed in actual clothes. Not the hospital gown, but jeans and a gray Henley, because apparently he had convinced a crew member to bring him a bag at some point. Reading a worn paperback with the oxygen cannula finally, mercifully gone. His oxygen was at 98. His color was better. He was, in the language of the 6th floor, turning a corner. She stayed 25 minutes. She told herself it was a pastoral follow-up visit. It was also, she noticed, with the honesty she tried to apply to herself when she could bear it, the most she had looked forward to anything since the fire season started. On the third day, Danny Bryce charmed 2 of the floor nurses into bringing him a deck of cards and taught Wade a game through the shared wall by shouting the instructions, one rule at a time. Elena could hear this from the corridor. She stood outside Wade's room for a moment, listening, and something eased in her in a way she did not examine too closely. She knocked and went in, and they were both laughing, Wade shaking his head slowly, Danny's voice carrying through the drywall with the confidence of a man who had decided acoustics were negotiable. And Elena laughed too. Truly, the first time in a week that laughter had come from somewhere real, rather than the place she kept it in reserve for the rooms where people needed to be reminded that it still existed. The fourth morning came as hard mornings did, without warning, already going. Elena was paged to the 3rd floor at 7:45 before she'd finished the first of the rounds she'd planned. Room 318, a firefighter with burns on 30% of his body and a fever that had climbed overnight, and a wife who was 8 months pregnant and had driven in at 4 in the morning when the hospital called. Elena pushed open the door and took in the room in one quiet assessment. The monitors, the bandaging, the young man in the bed who was conscious but frightened as people were frightened when their body became unfamiliar territory. And then she looked at the wife, who was standing at the window with both hands pressed flat against the glass, and her forehead bowed and her shoulders doing the work of holding everything in. Elena crossed to her first. She did not rush her through anything. She did not offer platitudes or pivot to silver linings or produce the laminated brochure that existed somewhere in the pastoral care department about navigating medical crises. She stood beside her at the window, and she was present, fully without reservation. And this was her gift, that capacity to stand in someone else's fire without needing to be somewhere that was not burning, which she could not quite explain when people asked how she did it. It was not technique. She talked. About her husband, about the baby coming in 5 weeks, about the fact that she had made him promise her every season that he would be careful, and he always said yes, and she always believed him, and she still believed him. but believing him had not kept his hands from looking as they did under that bandaging, and she did not know how to hold both things at once. Elena listened to every word. She asked the right questions, the ones that opened rather than redirected, and when she finally turned from the window and looked at Elena with raw, exhausted eyes and said, "I don't know how to be strong enough for this," Elena said, "You don't have to decide that right now. Right now, you just have to be here." "That's it?" "That's it." It was not nothing. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, which was everything. Elena stayed 2 hours. She prayed with both of them, his bandaged hand in hers, his wife on the other side of the bed. And the prayer was not performative and not managed, just honest, which was the only kind she knew how to offer. She walked out of room 318 at 9:55 and into the hallway and nearly walked into Simone, who was standing outside the door with a cup of coffee in each hand and an expression Elena had seen before. The one that meant she had been there long enough to witness something and was sorting out what it had cost her. Simone handed her one of the coffees. Elena took it without speaking. "How do you keep doing that?" Simone said. She said it in a low voice, no performance in it. Elena took a sip of coffee. It was from the good machine in the physician's lounge, not the third-floor one. She noticed the effort of that. "I don't know how to do it any other way." Simone looked at her for a moment, and Elena could see her doing the things she did, assessing, calculating, deciding what to say and what to hold. Then she said, "Come find me at lunch," and turned back toward the elevators, and Elena watched her go and felt the familiar gratitude she always felt for Simone's willingness to ask without requiring an answer. The email came at 10:23, while Elena was sitting in the break room between rounds with her chaplaincy notes open on her laptop and her second cup of coffee going cold beside her. The subject line read, "Director of Chaplaincy Services, following up." She recognized the name in the sender field, Dr. Alicia Fontaine, head of pastoral care at Denver Meridian Medical Center, one of the largest hospital systems in the Rocky Mountain region. They had met at a chaplaincy conference in February and had a conversation over breakfast that Elena had thought of several times since, not because she'd been looking for anything, but because Alicia Fontaine was one of the sharpest pastoral minds she'd encountered, and being seen by someone like that tended to stay with you. She opened it. The position was Director of Chaplaincy Services, a full department, 4 chaplains reporting to her, 2 administrative staff, an annual budget with actual resources in it, a salary that was, Elena calculated in one silent sweep of arithmetic, 40% more than what she made now. A support structure, supervision, peer consultation built into the schedule rather than something she had to build herself out of cafeteria lunches and Simone's back porch. The institutional backing she had been functioning without for 8 years in ways she had stopped noticing because you stopped noticing the weight you had decided to carry. They wanted an answer within 2 weeks. Elena read it twice. Then she read it a third time, more slowly, as you read something when you're trying to determine what you actually feel about it rather than what you expected to feel. She sat with it for what was probably 3 minutes, but felt longer. Then she closed her laptop and finished her cold coffee and went back to work, and did not mention it to anyone. She went to see Wade at 2 o'clock. He was in the chair by the window rather than the bed, which was progress. The nurses had wanted him walking the hallway, which he was doing, and sitting upright, which he clearly preferred to the alternative. He was watching the smoke-heavy sky with the focused attention of someone reading information in it, which, Elena had come to understand, he probably was. He knew this air, this valley, these mountains. Even hidden, they were familiar to him. "You're in the chair," she said. "I'm in the chair," he confirmed. Progress. She sat across from him. The conversation moved through the comfortable paces it had found over the last few days. His cruise updates, Danny's continued campaign to socialize his way to an early discharge, the latest fire behavior reports Wade was tracking with the focused attention of a man who could not fully disengage from a fire, even while recovering from one. He had a quality in conversation that she had noticed and kept noticing. He was fully present, not as people performed attentiveness, but as people were when they were actually interested. He did not check his phone while she was talking. He did not formulate his next sentence while she was finishing hers. "The wind is the thing nobody tells you," he said at one point, looking at the window. They had been talking about the fire on Tuesday, not the outcome, but the sequence, how it had moved. On paper, the terrain looks like it holds all the variables. The slope, the fuel load, the access routes. You plan for those. And then the wind shifts, and you have about 4 seconds to understand that the plan you made is the plan for a different fire. He paused. Everything changes in a second. You learn not to assume the ground you're standing on will hold. That sounds like it could make a person fatalistic, Elena said. Some people. For me, it went the other direction. He looked back at her. You can't control the wind. You can know the terrain. You can read the smoke. You can make the best call you can with what you have. And then you trust, not in your own preparation, in something bigger than the terrain. He said it without drama, just the plain delivery of a man who had arrived at a truth the long way and was not embarrassed by it. 1 Peter talks about that. How our faith gets tested. Scripture says it's like gold being refined. Gold doesn't get refined in comfortable conditions. It takes fire. He glanced at his bandaged forearms with a brief, dry expression. No pun intended. Elena smiled. Did you arrive at that comparison recently? About 3 years ago, lying in the ash after a fire that should have gone differently. He folded his hands. I thought God had let me down. Took me a while to understand that he was doing the refining, not the burning. A pause. The difference matters. She carried it home. She carried it as she carried most things from his room. Not consciously, not deliberately, but in the pocket of her mind where things waited until she had space to take them out. She fed Calvin and made soup she barely tasted, and sat at the kitchen table with her Bible open to the passage in 1 Peter, and she read it slowly. The scripture told its readers not to be surprised by the trials that came to test them, that their faith, proved genuine through such trials, would result in something more precious than gold, which perished even when it was refined. She read it twice and then stared at the page for a while. She had known this passage for years. She had shared its truth with patients and families more times than she could count, had watched it do its work in people whose suffering had begun, slowly, to take shape and make sense. She believed it. She was certain she believed it. But sitting at her kitchen table in the amber dark, with Calvin settling against her feet and the smoke pressing against the windows and the Denver email sitting unopened in the back of her mind like something she had set down in a hurry, she felt the strange, sharp discomfort of encountering a truth she had been handing to other people without standing inside it herself. She closed the Bible and picked up her phone. Simone answered on the second ring. I was wondering if you'd call. Something came today, Elena said. A job offer. Denver Meridian, Director of Chaplaincy Services. A pause. Elena. I know. That's a significant offer. I know. Simone was quiet for a moment as she thought, rather than just gathered words. Then, what did you feel when you read it? Elena looked at the middle distance of her kitchen, at the dark window above the sink, at the invisible mountains beyond. She thought about the pregnant wife's hands against the glass. She thought about Caleb Norris. She thought about the question she had been carrying for 4 days, turning it over, finding she could not put it down. "Relieved," she said. The word sat in the air of her kitchen, foreign and familiar at once. Simone said nothing for a moment. Then, in a low voice, "Yeah." A beat. "That's what I was afraid of." Neither of them spoke for a little while. Somewhere outside, a siren moved through the amber dark in the direction of the hospital. Elena listened to it fade. "I haven't decided anything," she said. "I know," Simone said. "I'm not pushing, I just—" She stopped. "Just don't decide it alone, okay? Whatever you decide." Elena said she wouldn't. She believed it about 50%. After she hung up, she sat for a long time at the kitchen table with the Bible closed in front of her and Calvin's weight warm against her feet, and she thought about gold and fire and the refining that happened in conditions that were not comfortable. And she thought about a man in a hospital chair who watched the smoke-covered sky like a man reading a language most people had never learned. Wade was nearly ready to be discharged. The nurses had said Friday, maybe Thursday, if his stats held. She had known this since yesterday. She had noted it clinically, professionally, with the same even detachment she brought to all patient transitions. She had also been not thinking about it with a consistency that told her quite a lot. Chapter 4. Outside These Walls. Wade was discharged on a Friday afternoon, and Elena happened to be on the 6th floor when Rosa Delgado arrived to collect him, a compact, sharp-eyed woman in her mid-30s who walked through the unit with the bearing of someone accustomed to moving through difficult terrain and assessing it quickly. She shook Elena's hand when Wade introduced them in the corridor, and her grip was firm, and her eyes took inventory in a single sweep. "He talked about you," Rosa said. "Rosa," Wade said. "I'm just telling her." Elena kept her expression professionally composed and told Wade she was glad he was feeling stronger and that he had her card if he needed anything. He took it and looked at it and put it in his shirt pocket and said, "Thank you," in the tone of a man who meant the specific word and not just the general sentiment. Danny, leaning out of the doorway of room 614 in his hospital gown, provided a send-off that involved finger guns and what he described as a spiritual blessing that Elena was fairly certain he had invented. She shook her head and walked back toward the elevators and told herself, efficiently and with conviction, that that was that. She believed it for approximately 48 hours. He called on Sunday at 2:30 while she was sitting on her porch with Calvin and a book she had not been reading. She looked at the number, which she had not saved but recognized because she had given out her card for 8 years and developed a memory for exchanges she had entered voluntarily. She answered on the 3rd ring. "I'm supposed to be rebuilding lung capacity," he said without preamble. Walking. The doctor was specific about duration and grade. "I've done it alone twice, and I hate it." A brief pause. "There's a trail along the Clark Fork, the Kim Williams. Do you know it?" She knew it, had walked it dozens of times, in every season, in every frame of mind. "I know it," she said. "Would you want to walk it? This afternoon if you're free. An hour, maybe less. I'm not supposed to push the grade yet." Another pause, briefer. "I want to be straightforward with you. I enjoy your company. I don't want to dress it up as something more pastoral than it is." Elena looked out at the smoky afternoon, at the invisible mountains, at Calvin, who offered no guidance. She was aware of the precise moment she made the decision, which arrived before she had finished fully reasoning through it. "I'll meet you at the trailhead," she said. "Give me 20 minutes. The Kim Williams Nature Trail ran along the north bank of the Clark Fork, east of downtown, wedged between the river and the steep face of Mount Sentinel, one of those narrow corridors of wildness that Missoula kept tucked inside itself like a secret it was proud of. Elena had always loved it for that. You could be standing in a parking lot with a coffee cup in your hand, and in 4 minutes be somewhere that felt truly removed from the city, the cottonwoods tall and close on either side, the river moving below, the mountain rising above. In late August of a drought year, it looked like a landscape holding its breath. The cottonwoods showed the first suggestion of yellow at their uppermost branches. Not autumn yet, just the earliest premonition of it, the trees acknowledging what was coming before the calendar did. The Clark Fork was running low, the waterline a foot below its spring mark, the current brown and slow. The smoke lay over everything as it always did in the afternoon, golden and diffuse, turning the light into something that felt both beautiful and wrong, as a photograph looked when the exposure was slightly off, but accidentally more interesting for it. Wade was already at the trailhead when she pulled in. He was in hiking pants and a lightweight long-sleeved shirt, his forearms still lightly wrapped, standing with his hands in his pockets looking east along the river. He turned when he heard her car. He looked considerably more himself than he had on the 6th floor, she thought. Outside and upright, in terrain he knew, he was a different kind of present, settled in a way the hospital had diluted. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You said you hated walking alone," she said. "I've had the same problem." They started east along the trail at an easy pace, neither pushing. The river was visible in glimpses through the cottonwood trunks, brown and low and moving with the slow deliberateness of something conserving itself. A pair of ducks worked upstream against the current. Above them, Mount Sentinel rose steeply, its face dry and golden in the smoky light, the white letter M visible even through the haze, a marker she had navigated by for years, without ever needing to be told what it meant. The conversation found its pace as it had in the hospital, not rushed, not filled for the sake of filling. He asked about her week. She told him about a young firefighter on the 3rd floor and his very pregnant wife. No names, no details that would identify them, how she always spoke about her patients outside the hospital. And he listened with his eyes forward and his attention full. When she finished, he said, "Did they make it through?" "He's going to have a hard recovery, but yes, things turned a corner." "And her?" "She'll carry it," Elena said. "That's not a tragedy. Carrying something isn't the same as being crushed by it." "No," he said. "It's not." They walked in silence for a bit. The trail curved closer to the river, and she could hear the water more clearly now, the low pull of it over the rocks below the bank. Somewhere to the south, beyond the ridgeline, the Lolo complex was still burning. 34 days. The air kept that knowledge in it, as water kept silt. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it, a heaviness that settled in the back of the throat. "Can I ask about the fire 3 years ago?" Elena said. "You mentioned it in the hospital. If you'd rather not." "I don't mind," he said. He looked at the trail ahead for a moment. The Bitterroot complex, 3 years back. We were on a ridgeline on the east side. Good defensible position, or it should have been. The wind shifted, and it shifted fast, and we had about 3 minutes to get to our safety zone. He paused. We made it. Everyone made it. But those 3 minutes were... I've been on fires for 16 years. I'd never felt that. The sense that the distance between where you are and where you need to be is not a guaranteed thing. He said it evenly, without drama. I lay in the ash afterward, not hurt, just unable to move. I kept asking God what had happened. What did he say? Nothing. He said it plainly. Not then. I drove out to the Rattlesnake Wilderness the next weekend. Just me and a pack and 2 days of walking, and I listened. Nothing. He glanced sideways at her. I used to think silence from God meant either I wasn't listening right or he was absent. That trip, I started to understand something different. There's a verse in the Psalms, the one about being still and knowing he is God. I'd always read that as instruction. Be still. But that trip, I started to hear it differently. Less like a command and more like an invitation to stop demanding an explanation and just stand in the presence of the one who holds it all. He paused. The silence wasn't absence. It was just a different kind of speech. Elena walked with that for a few steps. The cottonwood leaves turned in a small breath of wind off the river. Faith is what you do with the silence, she said. He had said it once before, in the hospital. She had been carrying it since. That's the best I've been able to put it. It's a good way to put it. He looked at her. Your turn, he said. She knew what he meant. She had offered him an opening 3 days ago, and he had taken it without pressing. And she had been aware since then that the accounting was not settled. She walked a few steps, feeling the familiar reflex rise, the redirect, the pivot, the practiced grace of returning the conversation to safer ground. She let it pass. I was 28, she said. Routine physical, except it wasn't routine. 3 weeks later, I was in a hospital bed at Ohio State with a diagnosis that they described as very treatable, which is the phrasing they use when they want the word treatable, to do more work than any single word can. She kept her eyes on the trail. I was there for 11 days, and on the 4th day, a chaplain came in. She was maybe 60, small, with reading glasses pushed up on her head. She didn't pray at me or offer me information I hadn't asked for. She just sat down and said, "Tell me what you're afraid of." A pause. I talked for an hour. She listened to all of it. She didn't fix anything. She just received it. All of it. And when she left, I felt like I'd set down something I hadn't known I was carrying. She looked at the river through the trees. I decided the next day that was what I wanted to do. Be the person who sat down and said, "Tell me what you're afraid of." And the illness? Resolved. I've been clear for 9 years. Do you ever think about the fact that your illness made you who you are? She was quiet for a moment. I think about it too carefully, she said, which was more honest than her usual answer, which was a confident yes delivered to close the subject. I'm not sure I finished thinking about it. There's something in it I haven't fully received yet. He didn't press. She was grateful for that. The trail dipped toward the river at a narrow section, the bank dropping off sharply just to the right, the roots of the cottonwoods surfacing across the path in thick, uneven ridges. Elena was looking at the river when her foot caught the edge of a root and her balance tipped. It happened fast, the lurch, the instinctive reaching for something that wasn't there. And then his hand was at her elbow, sure and immediate, and she was upright. She caught her breath. He hadn't moved away. His hand was still at her elbow, and she was still turned slightly toward him, and they were standing close in the dappled, smoke-gold light of the cottonwood corridor, with the Clark Fork moving somewhere below, and neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted longer than a moment. She was aware of the contact, with a clarity that had nothing to do with nearly falling. She was aware of the quality of his attention, how he looked at her, direct and calm, without performance or agenda. "Okay," he said. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." He let go of her arm. They started walking again. Neither of them commented on the pause. After a while, they turned back west, the trail returning them toward the parking lot at an easy grade. The mountains were beginning to show slightly through the smoke, not clear, not visible, just suggested. A softening of the gray. Elena thought about what he'd said by the river. Faith is what you do with the silence. She thought about the Denver email sitting in her inbox. "Can I say something?" Wade said. "Please." "What you do, I've seen a lot of chaplains in 16 years of firework, in a lot of hospitals. What you do is remarkable." He said it without ceremony, just information. How you were with my crew members, how you walked in that first morning. You asked exactly the right questions, and you knew exactly when to stop asking. It's a real gift. She recognized the warmth rising in her, and she recognized, a half-second later, what she was about to do with it. She opened her mouth to redirect, to credit her training, to point toward the work itself, to pivot gracefully to something that was not about her receiving a compliment. His expression shifted. "You just did it," he said. The redirect. "I saw you decide to do it." She laughed, startled, helpless. "I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. Your face moves about 2 seconds before you speak." He smiled, and it was the first full smile she had seen from him. Not the architectural suggestion from the hospital, but the real thing. And it rearranged his face completely. "I've been watching fire for 16 years. I know when something's deflecting the heat." She shook her head, laughing again, and did not redirect. She drove home along the river as the smoke-softened afternoon deepened toward evening. She sat in the driveway for a moment after turning off the engine, not moving, watching a hawk circle something above the ridge to the east. Calvin would be watching her through the front window, she knew, with the expression of a cat who had decided that human notions of appropriate arrival times were a form of fiction. She had promised herself she was going to pray about Denver. She had made this promise approximately 4 times since Thursday, and had kept it 0 times, because praying about it required deciding what she actually wanted, and she had been finding that question too large to stand in front of. She bowed her head over her steering wheel. She did not have a speech. She did not have a list of considerations or a theological framework. She had the question itself, bare and honest. "I don't know if I'm being called toward something or running from something. I don't trust myself to know the difference. I need you to be in this." It was not an eloquent prayer. She was fairly certain that didn't matter. She sat with the silence afterward, not demanding, not interpreting, just staying. The hawk made one more circle and disappeared over the ridge. The smoke was turning pink above the western mountains, the last of the August light, doing what fire season light did best, which was make the world look like it was burning gently from the inside. She did not have an answer. But she felt, for the first time, as though the question belonged to someone larger than herself, and that it was safe there, and that she did not have to carry it alone. That was enough for tonight. Chapter 5. When the reserves run dry. The wind shifted on the 1st of September, not toward the city. The fire behavior reports were cautious about saying that, but as the fire's character changed, as Wade had described on the trail, everything reorganizing in 4 seconds around a new set of variables. The Lolo complex sent up a column visible from the hospital windows that afternoon that turned the sky the color of copper, and by evening, the convoys were running again, and the 6th floor was filling, and the chaplain's pager did not stop. Elena worked Thursday straight through into Friday morning. She went home for 5 hours, showered, fed Calvin, and came back. She worked Friday. She worked the weekend. She did not count the rooms. She had learned not to count the rooms, as she had learned not to learn the names too early. The mathematics were not useful, and the work was not arithmetic. What mattered was the person in front of her, and then the next person, and the practiced discipline of bringing the same quality of presence to the last room of the day as the first. She had been doing this for 8 years, and she was good at it. Truly good. And she knew the difference between good work and empty performance, and she was not performing. But she was aware, with increasing clarity, that she was drawing from a well whose level she had stopped monitoring some time ago, and that the bucket was coming up slower than it should. She sat with a widow named Helen in a family consultation room on Saturday afternoon for 90 minutes. The woman's husband had been a 44-year-old crew boss with 17 years of firework behind him and a farm outside of Hamilton that he had been planning to retire to in 3 years. Elena did not know any of this at first. She learned it in pieces as Helen talked, not crying, past crying, in that territory beyond tears, where a person just spoke because silence had become uninhabitable. Elena received every word. She asked the right questions and left the right silences, and held the space with everything she had, and when she finally walked out of the consultation room, the corridor felt very long and very bright, and she stood still for a moment with one hand on the wall before she moved. She was remarkable at this work. She was also emptying. Wade texted on Tuesday. Not a long message, he had an economy with words that she had come to recognize as a feature of his character rather than a limitation of it. How are you holding up out there? Not asking as a formality. She looked at it for longer than she needed to. She was in the break room, 11 minutes into what was optimistically scheduled as a 30-minute lunch, and the question sat in her palm with a weight disproportionate to its 11 words. She thought about the answers she could give. She typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. "It's a heavy week," she finally wrote. "I'm okay." A pause. Then, "I know what okay sounds like when it means something else. Coffee tomorrow if you're free. No agenda." She smiled at her phone in the empty break room, which felt like the most purely spontaneous thing she had done in days. "Yes," she wrote. Noon. The cafe was a small place on Higgins Avenue, 2 blocks from the Clark Fork, with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls, and coffee that came in real ceramic mugs rather than paper. Elena had been coming here since graduate school. It was a place that remembered who it was, regardless of what the season outside was doing, and she needed that today. Wade was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table with 2 mugs already on it, his hands folded around one of them. He stood briefly when she came in, an old-fashioned reflex, she thought, that she found unexpectedly settling, and she sat across from him and wrapped both hands around the mug and felt something in her posture change. The specific quality of a body recognizing that it could stop bracing, at least for an hour. "You look better than I expected," he said. "That's a low bar." "It's still true." He studied her face with the directness she had gotten used to. "Rough weekend." The wind shift on Thursday changed the fire's behavior. The hospital has been... She stopped, started again. "It's been a lot." "How many days in a row?" 6, 7, counting today. He didn't wince or exclaim. He just received it. "Are you eating?" "Sometimes." He said nothing to that, just pushed a small plate toward her that she hadn't noticed. 2 pieces of coffee cake from the counter, the kind with streusel on top that this cafe did well. She looked at it, and then at him, and he said, "I ordered when I got here, I guessed." She took a piece without arguing. They talked for a while about ordinary things. His returning lung capacity, the trail he had walked that morning up toward the Rattlesnake Wilderness boundary, Danny Bryce's discharge earlier that week, and the send-off the crew had given him at a barbecue at Rose's house. He described the barbecue with quiet affection, how he described all the things that belonged to him. Elena listened and ate the coffee cake and felt herself coming slightly back to herself, as a room came back into focus when the windows were opened. She was telling him about a family she had been walking with through the week. No details, no names, just the shape of the thing. the different weight of sustained grief versus acute grief, and how they required different things of her. When she ran out of words in the middle of a sentence, it happened without warning. She was speaking, and then she was not, her mouth stopping as though the sentence had reached a wall it couldn't get past, and she sat there looking at the table with her hands around her mug, and nothing coming. She had been awake for a very long time. She felt his hand before she saw it, his palm coming over both of hers, warm and certain, covering them where they were wrapped around the mug. He didn't say anything for a moment. Just that, the weight and warmth of it. "You're allowed to be tired, Elena," he said. She did not pull away. She looked at his hand over hers, and she thought about how long it had been since someone had done a thing like this. Not the gesture specifically, but the category of thing. The reaching toward, the seeing and responding without being asked. She thought about it and felt the fullness of it, and did not try to minimize it. "I'm not used to someone noticing," she said. "I know," he said. He left his hand there a moment longer, and then moved it back gracefully and lifted his mug. The shift was easy, not withdrawal, but a restoration of the space they had been in before, the space in which she could breathe, without it meaning anything she wasn't ready for it to mean. She was grateful for that intelligence. They talked for another 20 minutes. She changed the subject eventually, and he followed the change without comment, and by the time she left, she felt like a person who had slept rather than a person who had been running on substitutes for it. She stood outside the cafe while he held the door, and they said goodbye on the sidewalk in the September noon, and she walked to her car, and he walked to his truck. And she sat for a moment before starting the engine and watched him pull out of the parking lot, and thought that no one had felt that safe to her in a very long time. She drove back to the hospital and went back to work. The Denver deadline was 1 week away. She sat with that fact Wednesday evening in a way she had not yet allowed herself to sit with it, directly, without the buffer of busyness. She had opened the email 3 times and closed it twice without responding. She had a draft reply in her outbox that said she was still prayerfully considering the opportunity, which was true as far as it went, and did not go as far as the truth required. She had been praying Isaiah 26:3 for years. The scripture's promise was one she returned to often, the assurance of perfect peace for the person whose mind was fixed on God, who trusted in Him completely. She had prayed it with patience. She had written it on cards she left on hospital bedside tables. She had believed it with her whole heart and offered it freely and generously to everyone who needed it. She sat with her Bible open to the passage on Wednesday evening and acknowledged, with the uncomfortable honesty that had been arriving in increasing frequency since a man in a hospital bed asked who took care of the chaplain, that she had been handing this promise to other people like a gift she had never unwrapped herself. The peace it described required being still long enough to receive it. She had not been still in 8 years. She had been serving and giving and moving through the rooms of other people's crises with such focused care that she had used the motion as a reason not to stop, and stopping, she was now understanding, was the condition that the peace required. She was not performing trust. She had just been too busy to practice it. Pastor Carl and June Whitfield lived 10 minutes from the hospital in a house that had been a parsonage for 30 years, and wore that history as good houses wore such things, comfortably with the warmth of a place that had received a great deal of people over a great deal of time. Elena had been here 6 times in 4 years at Riverside, always for something pastoral, a planning meeting, a care team gathering. She had never come because she needed to. June opened the door before she knocked, which meant she had been watching for the headlights. "I made tea," June said, as though Elena arrived at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday evening on a regular basis. She pulled her into the entry with both hands and kept one of them as she led her to the sitting room, which smelled like the tea she had made, and the books that lined 2 full walls, and the faint cedar of the old house itself. Pastor Carl was in the armchair by the window, and he rose when Elena came in with the natural dignity that was his characteristic mode. A man fully at ease in himself, comfortable with silence, and with people equally. He had been a pastor for 30 years. He had sat in more hospital rooms than Elena had, she suspected, and none of it showed. He had given it to God for so long that it had become reflex. "Sit down, Elena," he said. "You look like someone who's been standing for a long time." She sat. June handed her tea. She told them about Denver. She told it plainly: the offer, the salary, the department, the deadline. She told them about the last 2 weeks, about the fire season, about the reserves running low in ways she could no longer paper over with professionalism. She did not mention Wade by name, but she mentioned that someone had asked her recently who took care of the chaplain, and that she had not been able to answer the question. Carl listened with his hands folded. June listened with hers wrapped around her mug, her eyes on Elena's face. When Elena finished, Carl said, "What does it feel like when you imagine going?" She thought about the words she had said to Simone on the phone 2 weeks ago. "Relieved," she said, "which frightens me." Carl nodded slowly. He did not rush to fill the space that opened after the word. June set down her mug. She had the gift, Elena had always noticed, of waiting until the right moment with the patience of someone who had learned that the right moment was always worth waiting for. She said, "The question isn't whether Denver is a good opportunity, Elena. It may well be a wonderful opportunity. The question is whether you'd be running toward something, or away from something you're afraid to receive." The room was very quiet. Elena looked at the woman across from her and felt the sentence land as true things did. Not painfully, but precisely, like a key in the right lock. She had been asking the wrong question for 2 weeks, whether to go or stay, whether God was opening a door, whether she deserved the resources Denver was offering. All of it orbiting the real question, which was the one June had just said out loud. "I don't know," Elena said. It was the most honest thing she had said all week. "That's a good answer," Carl said. "It means you're asking the right question now." She left at 10:15 and drove straight to the hospital to retrieve a file she'd left on her desk, which was the reason she gave herself for the detour, and which was true. She parked and went up and got the file and came back through the main lobby at 10:40, pulling her coat on, her mind still in the Whitfield sitting room. She heard them before she saw them. A family, 4 of them, 2 adults and 2 teenagers, came through the lobby doors at a near run, and she stepped back automatically against the wall to let them pass. She recognized the mother from earlier in the week, one of the families she had been walking through something protracted and uncertain. The mother was crying and laughing at once, which was its own distinct sound, and the teenagers were holding each other by the arms, and the father was saying something Elena couldn't hear, but didn't need to hear, because it was written plainly in everything: the stride, the tears, the reaching. Their person had made it. Elena watched them go. The elevator doors opened and received them and closed, and the lobby returned to its nighttime quiet. And then Elena was crying. She was not expecting it, and she could not have said precisely why this, of all the things the last 10 days had contained, was the thing, except that sometimes the relief of others broke the surface of something you had been holding down without knowing you were holding it. She was crying, and she could not stop. And the lobby was empty, but not private enough. And she found the stairwell door and went through it and sat down on the second step from the bottom and put her face in both hands and wept in a way she had not wept in years. Not for anything she could name. For all of it. For Caleb Norris's mother with her cold coffee. for the widow who had talked for 90 minutes past tears, for 8 years of rooms and hands and prayers, and the well that had given and given and been given nothing back, and for the question she had not been able to answer, and for the terrifying, specific possibility that there was something here, in this city, in this season, in this life she had built inside these walls, that she was afraid to fully receive. She sat on the step until the crying finished. It finished on its own schedule, which was the only way it ever did. She wiped her face. She sat in the fluorescent quiet of the stairwell and breathed. Above her, through the fire door, the hospital went on doing what hospitals did. Its sounds muffled but present, the low-frequency hum of a building full of people in the middle of their hardest hours. She had given 8 years to those people, and she did not regret a single hour of it. But she was beginning to understand that giving was not the whole of what God had for her here, that the refining was not only in the giving, that somewhere along the way she had confused the ministry with the life, and the life, her life, the actual interior of it, had been waiting for her to notice. She gathered herself. She stood. She pushed back through the fire door and walked toward the exit, and the lobby lights were bright above her, and she went home. Chapter 6. The question she couldn't answer. 2 days after the lobby, Elena had not told anyone about the stairwell. Not Simone, not June Whitfield, not the journal she kept on her nightstand and opened approximately 4 times a year. She had filed it in the category of things she would return to when she had space for them, which was the category where most things about herself lived, and she had gone back to work on Thursday and Friday with the same quality of presence she brought every day. And if something had shifted in the interior landscape, she kept private. It did not show in the rooms where it couldn't afford to show. The Denver deadline was 5 days out. She had not written back. She had not decided. She had been praying with a consistency that surprised her. Not the managed professional prayers she offered in patient rooms, but the stripped-down, honest kind she had begun finding her way back to since the trail along the Clark Fork. She had no answer yet. She was trying to be at peace with that, and finding it easier in the morning than in the evening, and nearly impossible at 2 a.m, which was when the questions tended to present themselves at full volume. Friday afternoon, she lost a patient she had not expected to lose. He was not a firefighter. He was a 67-year-old man who had been on the 4th floor for 11 days with a cardiac event, and who had been, by every medical indication Elena had been given, trending toward discharge. She had sat with him 3 times. He had a photograph of his wife on the bedside table, and a dry wit and a habit of quoting old westerns at moments that required it. He had told her on Tuesday that he was going home Saturday, and that his wife was making pot roast, and that he intended to eat 2 plates of it without apology. He was gone at 4:15 on Friday. Elena sat with his wife for an hour and a half. She was everything the woman needed. She walked out of the room at 5:50 and into the corridor and stood at the window at the end of the hall, the same window, the same 6th-floor view, and looked at the mountains. They were visible today, more visible than they had been in weeks, the smoke thinning slightly, the outline of Mount Sentinel returning to something she could trace. She stood there and looked at them and did not move for a while. She was not crying. She had cried 2 days ago in the stairwell, and something about that had changed the pressure, as releasing a valve changed the pressure, and what she felt now was something past tears. A deep, cellular exhaustion that she did not know how to put down or where to put it. She had been carrying it so long, she was no longer sure what it weighed. She heard the elevator open at the end of the corridor. She did not turn around. Footsteps. Then a pause. Then from a distance that was respectful but not indifferent. Elena. She turned. Wade was standing 20 feet away, dressed in the clothes of someone who had come from the outdoors, flannel over a thermal, work pants, his forearms bare now, the bandaging finally gone. The burns had healed to something that would eventually become scars and had already become part of what his arms looked like. He had a follow-up appointment that afternoon with the pulmonologist on the 4th floor, routine post-discharge monitoring for the smoke inhalation, and had stopped by the 6th floor afterward without examining too carefully why. He was looking at her with the focused attention she had stopped being surprised by. He did not say what she expected people to say. That she was fine, that she was clearly fine, that she just needed a minute. He said, "Come sit down somewhere." She meant to say she was fine. She had been saying she was fine for 8 years, with a conviction and fluency that had made it feel nearly true. She opened her mouth, and what came out was, "Okay." The stairwell again, because it was close and private, and she had, apparently, begun to think of it as hers. She went first. He followed, and the door closed behind them, and they sat on the same step she had sat on 2 nights ago, side by side, his jacket set on the step below. He did not ask her what happened. He sat beside her on the step, without being asked, and looked at the wall across from them, and let the silence be what it needed to be, which was a room she could enter at her own pace. After a while, she told him about the man she had lost that afternoon. No name, the 8-year reflex, just an older man, cardiac, someone she had expected to see go home Saturday. She told it briefly, and heard her own clinical distance as she spoke, and felt a sudden exhaustion with it, the same exhaustion she'd felt reading Isaiah 26:3 at her kitchen table, handing out what she needed and not keeping any of it. "I won't ask if you're okay," Wade said. "I know. You don't have to perform anything in here." She looked at her hands folded in her lap. "I'm not sure I know how to stop." He turned his head to look at her, and she felt his attention settle on her with a weight that was not pressure. "Then don't stop on purpose," he said. "Just don't start, either. Just be here." She sat with that. The stairwell hummed around them, the building systems, the elevator shaft nearby, the muffled sounds of the floor above. She had been in this hospital for 8 years. She had walked every corridor and sat in every waiting room and held space in every consultation room, and she had never just sat in a stairwell with another person and let the building hold her for a while. "Can I say something I haven't said out loud before?" she said. "Yes," he said. No hesitation. She looked at the step below her feet. "I think I became the chaplain so I would never have to be the patient again." She said it like saying something you had not known was fully formed until it left your mouth, with the slightly startled quality of discovery. Not consciously, but I think somewhere under everything, under the calling, which is real, and the work, which I love, there's a version of me that decided if I was always the one sitting in the chair, I would never have to be the one in the bed. She paused. "I give from a place of real love. I'm not performing the care. I love these people, but I think I've also been using the giving as a reason not to receive. Because receiving means being seen, and being seen means being..." She stopped again. "Vulnerable," he said. "I was in a hospital bed once, and I was terrified," she said. "And someone came in and sat with me and asked what I was afraid of, and I told her all of it, every piece, and I felt something I had never felt before, which was completely known and still held." She looked at the wall. "I think I have been trying to be that person for everyone else, and I have not let anyone be it for me. I think I told myself that was selflessness. A beat. I'm not sure it was. The stairwell was very quiet. "That took courage to say," Wade said. "It took 8 years," she said. "Sometimes that's how long courage takes." She exhaled, a long, releasing breath that she had apparently been holding since Friday at 4:15, or possibly since longer than that. She felt lighter in a way that was not resolution, not yet, but was the first physical sensation of having set something down. "Your turn," she said. She had said it to him on the trail, and he had said it back to her, and it had become the language between them for this. The mutual accounting, the recognition that vulnerability was not a one-way door. He was quiet for a moment. Not reluctant, just gathering. "After the Bitterroot fire," he said. "The 2 days in the rattlesnake. I told you, I didn't hear anything." He looked at the ceiling briefly, and then back at the opposite wall. "That's true, and it's not the whole truth. On the second morning I woke up, and the wilderness was just there, silent and enormous and completely indifferent to my questions." He paused, and I realized I had been approaching God as I approached a fire. Trying to read the behavior, trying to predict the movement, trying to make a plan that accounted for all the variables so I would not be caught without one. He turned his head toward her. "I'm a crew leader. That's what I do. It's what keeps people alive. But God is not a fire." A small pause, and standing in that wilderness at 6 a.m, I felt him say, not in words, just in the weight of the moment, "Be still. I am God. Stop analyzing and just be here with me." She recognized the passage, Psalm 46. She had read it as instruction too, she realized, as another thing to do. The silence wasn't absence, she said. He had said this to her before, and she was saying it back with new meaning. "It was an invitation," he said, "to stop demanding that he operate on my terms." She thought about the last 2 weeks, the prayers that had been more management than surrender, how she had approached even her own faith with the same professional composure she brought to the rooms upstairs, careful, capable, in control of the process. "I think he's been trying to get my attention for a long time," she said. She had arrived at it herself, which felt important. "I think so too." He said it without triumph, without the tone of a person who had known it first. Just agreement, offered level and plain. "I think he put a fire season in your path and put people in your hospital who needed you, and let the reserves run down until there was nothing left to manage with, because management was the thing in the way." He paused. "I don't think any of this has been punishment, Elena. I think it's been the opposite." She looked at him. "Refining," she said. "The gold that came through fire." The difference between the fire and the refining is what you said about the young mother on the trail. Carrying something isn't the same as being crushed by it. He held her gaze. "You've been in the fire. I think you're at the refining part." She felt the truth of it below the level of thought, in a place that recognized before the mind caught up. She looked at her hands. "The Denver offer," she said. She had not mentioned it to him before. She watched him receive the information, the brief recalibration behind his eyes, the absence of any performed reaction. "Tell me about it," he said. She told him, the department, the resources, the support structure she had never had, the salary, the sense, when she had first read it, of relief. She told it plainly, and watched him listen plainly in return. No counsel offered, no opinion projected. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What does it feel like now?" he said. "Like a question I have to answer from the right place," she said. "Not from fear or from exhaustion, from—" She searched for the word. Clarity. I don't have it yet. He nodded. I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter to me, he said. He said it looking at the step below, and then he looked up at her and said it again, differently, not restating but confirming, as one confirmed something that needed to be heard clearly. It matters to me. The air in the stairwell changed, or she changed in it. She was aware of the proximity the narrow step created, his shoulder close to hers, his face turned toward her. She was aware that she did not want to move away, and had not wanted to for some time, and that this was information she was ready to have. He reached up, and his hand came to her face. Not cupping it, just a single, careful gesture, his fingers brushing a strand of hair back from her temple and tucking it gently behind her ear. That was all. He did not move closer. His hand came to rest for just a moment against the side of her face, warm and careful, his thumb barely grazing her cheekbone. She breathed. He let his hand drop. Neither of them said anything. It did not need anything said. She drove home in the dark and fed Calvin and made tea she did not drink, and sat at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood. She opened her Bible. She had been moving through 2 Corinthians this week with the halting progress of someone navigating familiar terrain in new light, finding that passages she had known for years were declining to mean what they had meant before, and insisting on something larger instead. She found the 3rd chapter. She read the verse she had underlined years ago, and then apparently forgotten how to inhabit. The scripture that described believers being transformed from one degree of glory to the next, not by their own effort, but by the Spirit of God, as a mirror reflected what it faced. She read it 3 times. Not striving, not managing, not giving from a professional distance, and calling it discipleship. Transformed by facing the right direction and letting the Spirit do what the Spirit did. From glory to glory, not in one great overnight renovation, but incrementally, faithfully, in the ordinary passage of being present to God as she had learned to be present to other people. She thought about what fire season had cost her, and what it had given her, and whether she was ready to call them the same thing. She thought about a man sitting beside her on a stairwell step without being asked, leaving his hand on hers in a coffee shop, tucking her hair back with the careful attention of someone who knew that restraint was its own declaration. She thought about the question that no one had asked her in 8 years. She picked up her phone. She pulled up the email and wrote a short, courteous reply to Dr. Alicia Fontaine, asking whether she might have 1 additional day to confirm her answer. She pressed send before she could revise it. Then she set the phone face down on the table and looked at the closed Bible under her hands and thought, this is what refining looks like. Not the fire itself. This. She turned off the kitchen light and went to bed and slept without interruption for the first time in 2 weeks, and if she dreamed she did not remember it, only that the mountains were visible and the air was clean, and she was not carrying anything alone. Chapter 7. What fire refines. She knew before she looked. There was something different in the quality of the light coming through the bedroom curtains, not the amber heaviness she had woken to every morning for 6 weeks, not the copper-tinted gray that pressed against the windows, even before sunrise. This was thinner, cleaner. She lay still for a moment and knew, and then she got up and went to the window and pulled back the curtain. Blue. Not a blue that was working toward something or settling for itself or making excuses. An actual, unambiguous Montana September blue. The sky above the Rattlesnake Wilderness sharp and clear and reaching as far as she could see in every direction. She turned to the east, and Mount Sentinel was there. Fully there, its ridgeline drawn against the sky with the precision of something that had always been waiting on the other side of the smoke. She turned to the south, and the mountains above the Bitterroot Valley were green and gold and present, every ridge distinct. The Clark Fork would be catching the morning light right now, she knew, flashing silver below the cottonwoods. She stood at the window for longer than she needed to. Calvin appeared beside her on the sill and looked out with the detached assessment of a cat who had opinions about the weather and was reserving judgment. She put her hand on his back. The mountains were there. The mountains had always been there. They were there now. She thought about the things that were true even when you couldn't see them, and she went to make coffee. She called Dr. Fontaine at 8:15. She had rehearsed nothing. She had learned in the last 2 weeks that rehearsed words were a form of management, and she was trying to put management down in situations that called for something more honest. She sat at the kitchen table with her coffee mug and her phone and the blue sky outside the window, and she waited for the line to connect. Dr. Fontaine answered on the second ring. She was warm and professional and clearly a woman who respected directness, and Elena gave her directness in return. She said she was grateful for the offer, that she meant that without qualification, that the work being done at Denver Meridian was work she admired. She said she had prayed about it carefully and that she was declining. Dr. Fontaine was quiet for a moment and then said she was sorry to hear it and that she understood, and that the offer stood if Elena's circumstances ever changed, and she said it as if she meant it, not as the prescribed response to a declined offer. They spoke for another few minutes, about chaplaincy, about the fire season, about the shape of the work, and by the time Elena set the phone down on the table, she felt not the relieved lightness of escape, but something graver and more sustaining. The settled weight of a decision made from the right place. She sat with it for a minute. Then she opened her laptop and found the name of the counselor that Pastor Carl had recommended 3 weeks ago and sent an email requesting an appointment. She had been meaning to do this since the night in the Whitfield sitting room. She did it now before meaning became a substitute for doing. She closed the laptop. The mountains were still there. Simone was already at their corner table when Elena arrived at the cafe on Higgins, 15 minutes early, which for Simone indicated something significant. She had a coffee in front of her and one waiting across the table, and she looked at Elena with the full inventory gaze she usually reserved for patients, and then her expression shifted into something that was not quite relief, but was in that neighborhood. "You look different," Simone said. "The sky's blue." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Elena sat and wrapped her hands around the waiting mug. "I called Denver this morning." Simone set down her coffee. "I declined," Elena said. The silence that followed was not empty. It had texture, weight, the quality of a silence between two people who had known each other long enough that some things did not require words to be fully communicated. Simone looked at her for a long moment, and something moved in her expression. Not surprise, because Simone was rarely surprised, but something that looked like the satisfaction of watching a thing resolve as it was supposed to. "Tell me why," Simone said. Elena told her. Not all of it. Some of it belonged to the stairwell and the trail, along the river and rooms she was still finding her way through. But enough. She told her about the night in the Whitfield sitting room and June's question. She told her about the Isaiah passage and how she had been handing its promise to other people from the outside of it. She told her that she had been ministering from a wound she had called healed for years, and that the fire season had made that impossible to sustain, and that she was beginning to understand that impossibility as mercy. Simone listened without interrupting, which was not her default mode, and was therefore a form of love. "I made an appointment with the counselor," Elena said. "Good," Simone said. Just that. No elaboration, no affirmation beyond the word, which was worth more than a speech would have been. "I'm not going anywhere," Elena said. Missoula is... She stopped. Tried again. I think the refining is here. Whatever God is doing in me, He is doing it here, and I want to be here for it. Simone picked up her coffee mug. She looked at Elena over the rim of it, with the expression she wore when she was deciding whether to say the thing. She said the thing. Does any of this have anything to do with a certain hotshot crew leader? Elena looked at her mug. Elena. It has something to do with him, she said, among other things. Simone smiled, not the small observational smile she deployed most often, but the full one, which she rationed carefully. You've been Missoula's for a long time, she said. I think you just finally figured it out. They stayed for an hour. There was laughter, real laughter, the unmanaged kind, over coffee and the memory of Danny Bryce's voice through the hospital wall, and the look on Rosa Delgado's face when she had arrived to collect Wade from the 6th floor. It was the best hour Elena had spent in this cafe in longer than she could calculate, which was information in itself. The gathering at Caras Park on Saturday afternoon had the texture of something good arriving after a long, hard season. Unforced, easy, carrying the weight of something earned. Wade had invited her 10 days ago, in a text that was characteristic in its brevity. Small group end-of-summer gathering, Caras Park, Saturday the 12th, 3 p.m. You should come. No pressure in it. She had said yes, and then not thought about it anxiously, which was new. The park was itself again. The smoke was gone, and the Clark Fork ran below the pavilion in its September register, lower than spring but moving, catching the afternoon light in broad silver flashes between the cottonwoods. The mountain stood in every direction, the full geography of the valley restored and present. Elena parked and walked toward the sound of people and found them, 8 or 10 of them arranged around picnic tables near the river. A spread of food in the middle, someone's portable speaker producing something acoustic and low. Wade saw her first. He was standing with 2 men she didn't know, and he turned at her approach as though he had been aware of her arrival before he could have seen it, and he crossed to her without hurrying and said, "You made it." And she heard in those 3 words a quieter sentence underneath them. He introduced her to his small group, faces she recognized from Sunday mornings, names she now attached to them with the permanence that came from context. Rosa Delgado was there, and Elena liked her immediately, and more, somehow, than she had at their first meeting. Danny Bryce was there, looking fully restored, eating from a plate loaded with a confidence that indicated his appetite had suffered no lasting damage from his hospital stay. He greeted Elena with the energy of a man who considered her a personal friend and offered her a seat next to him with the ceremony of someone bestowing an honor. "I've been telling people about you," he said. "I'm not sure that's advisable," Elena said. "All good things." He considered. Mostly. Pastor Carl and June arrived at 4. Carl in the casual clothes that always seemed to surprise people who knew him primarily in a pulpit context. June found Elena within 3 minutes of arriving and held both her hands and looked at her face and said, "There you are," in a tone that covered several conversations at once. Elena stayed 2.5 hours. She did not hover near Wade or track his movements through the afternoon. She talked to Rosa about fire seasons and the Bitterroot District and the mountains they both loved. She talked to Danny about his plans for the off-season and listened to him describe them with the cheerful ambition of someone who treated recovery as a minor interruption to living. She helped carry food to the tables and sat with Carl for 20 minutes in the late afternoon light while he talked about the church, and she realized, settling into the conversation, that she was at home, not performing belonging, not giving from a professional distance and calling it community, just there, in the park, in the afternoon, with these people, in this city, held by all of it. It was a small thing and it was enormous. The gathering wound down by 6, The tables cleared, the groups dispersing into the parking lot in twos and threes. Elena was helping fold a tablecloth when Wade appeared beside her and took the other end, and they folded it together in the wordless coordination of people who had learned each other's rhythms. And when it was done, he said, "Walk with me before you go." They went down to the river. The riverbank path behind Caris Park ran close to the water, the cottonwoods tall on either side, their leaves beginning the slow turn toward gold at the edges. The September light was doing what September light did in a Montana valley after a fire season, coming in long and amber through the clear air, every color heightened by the contrast with what had been. The Clark Fork caught it and gave it back in broken pieces. They walked without talking for a little while, and the silence was the comfortable sort, with nothing to prove. The mountains were above them in every direction, and she looked at them freely, letting them be what they were, not taking them for granted, as you did with things that had always been present, and then suddenly were not. He reached for her hand. It was unannounced and certain, his fingers finding hers and closing around them, and she held on in return, without hesitation or analysis. They walked like that along the riverbank, the cottonwoods shedding the first few early leaves onto the path, the water low and silver below the bank. After a while, he stopped. She stopped beside him. The river moved below. Across the water, the far bank rose into the foothills, and beyond them the mountains, the long forested ridgelines, green and gold and clear. The air held the honest coolness of September evenings in this valley, not cold yet, but carrying the first suggestion of what was coming, the mountains already knowing what the valley was still learning. He turned toward her. "I've been walking into fire for 16 years, he said. He said it looking at her, not away from her. "I've never been afraid of hard things, dangerous things, things that cost something." He paused. A breath. "You're the first person who made me afraid of the easy ones." She looked at him. "The ordinary things," he said. "Coffee, a walk, an afternoon in a park." He held her gaze with the same directness he brought to everything. Nothing performed in it, nothing managed. Those are the things that last, and lasting things. He stopped. "I didn't know I was afraid of lasting things until you." She understood what he was saying. She understood all of it, the full weight of it, and she did not deflect, and she did not redirect, and she did not turn it gently back toward him with a chaplain's practiced grace. She let it land in the center of her and felt it land and stayed there. She stepped closer. He did not move away. His hand, still holding hers, shifted slightly, a small tightening, an acknowledgement. The river ran below them, and the mountains stood above, and the September air moved through the cottonwoods with a sound like pages turning, and she was present to all of it, and to him and to herself, in a way she was not sure she had ever been at once. "I'm not going to Denver," she said. His face shifted. Not surprise. Something more interior than surprise. Recognition, maybe. Relief. Offered without shame. "I know," he said. "I didn't want to ask." "I know you didn't." She looked at him. "I'm staying. I have some things to work on, some interior renovation." She said it with the dry lightness that had begun to come more naturally, the levity that lived below the serious rather than above it. "It might not always look pretty." "I'll take the risk," he said. She laughed, and he smiled. The full smile, the one that rearranged his face. And they stood together on the bank of the Clark Fork in the long September light, with the mountains all around them and their hands still holding. And it was not an ending. It was the opposite of an ending. Monday morning. Elena parked in the hospital lot at 7:40 and sat for a moment with her hands in her lap and the blue sky through the windshield and the mountains sharp above the roofline to the east. She had slept well again. She was beginning to suspect this might become a pattern. She went up to the 6th floor first, before her rounds. She had a patient she wanted to check on. An older woman admitted Friday, difficult diagnosis, family still absorbing it. She walked the corridor and found the room and stopped outside the door. She had not done this before. Not paused here, not like this. She bowed her head. The prayer was not long, and it was not polished. She asked to be truly present in what she was about to do. She asked to give from a place that was being replenished rather than depleted. She asked, specifically and without apology, to receive before she gave, to stand in what she believed before she offered it to someone else. She thought of the scripture in 2 Corinthians, the transformation that happened not by striving, but by facing the right direction. She thought of John 16:33, the promise she had spoken over patients and families more times than she could count, the assurance that in this world there would be trouble, but to take heart, because he had overcome the world. She had been offering that verse outward for 8 years. She let it move inward now. Let it settle in her own chest, in the places that had been wrung out and were only beginning to refill. He had overcome, not around the trouble, through it and past it, and he was on the other side, holding what she could not carry. She lifted her head. She pushed open the door. At noon, she took her lunch to the 6th floor window, the one at the end of the corridor, the one that looked south toward the Bitterroot, the one she had stood at more times than she could count over 8 years of August nights. She stood there with her coffee and looked out. The Clark Fork caught the September light below. She could see it from here today, silver and moving, tracing its path through the city's heart as it always had. Caras Park spread along its bank, green and open. The mountains rose above the city in every direction. Mount Sentinel to the east, its white letter clear against the dry grass of the hillside. The Rattlesnake Wilderness to the north, green against the blue sky. The Bitterroot Ridgeline to the south, the long country where the fire had been and was not anymore. The smoke was gone. She stood at the window between one room and the next, between the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming, between 8 years of giving from behind glass and the first real morning of something more open than that. The mountains were present and clear and fully themselves, and the city breathed the clean air under them, and the river ran through the middle of everything as rivers always had, without apology, without interruption, following what was lowest and truest in the terrain. She finished her coffee. She went back to work.
I learned to sit with broken people, to hold the weight they couldn't name, to speak of peace in darkened places, and trust that God would take the pain. But somewhere in the years of giving, I lost the feel of being known. I offered everything to others and learned to carry it alone. Then one voice asked the question no one had thought to ask before: who holds the one who holds everyone? And gently opened up a door. Even through fire, even through my gift with armor and called the distance discipline. But grace reached in and asked me gently to finally stop and be let in. He saw the woman, not the calling. He saw the wound behind the role. And something about being noticed was more than I had known to hold. One question broke the silence that I had lived inside for years. Who holds the one who holds everyone? The answer slowly became clear. Even through fire, gold doesn't perish, it is made more true. Even through fire, you carry me higher. I'm not consumed, I'm being made anew. Even through fire. Be still and know that He is God. His peace surpasses all we've sought. In this world there will be trouble, but He has overcome it all. From one degree of glory onward, not by striving, but by grace. I am carried, I am changing, I am finally in the right place. Even through fire, gold doesn't perish, it is made more true. Even through fire, you carry me higher. I'm not consumed, I'm being made anew. Even through fire, I am held. Even through fire, I am known. Even through fire, you are God, and I am never on my own. Even through fire.
Thank you for spending some time with us, listening, reflecting, and resting in God's endless love. If this story touched you, encouraged you, or brought a moment of peace, I'd be so grateful if you'd leave a like. It helps our uplifting stories reach more hearts. If you'd like to join us for more grace-filled tales, please subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next one. Until we meet again in the next story, may you carry His grace with you, one gentle step at a time. Simply Grace Audio. Simple stories, endless grace.